pronouncements like, yes, this is what Buddha taught. But this is as reliable as we can get, because for a long time in the Buddhist case, his teachings weren't written down. Now, not because his disciples didn't know how to write, but the context of India is that religious matters weren't committed to writing for a long, long time, until much later. Writing, when they were used to record mundane things, such as commerce, such as recording history, such as reporting what happened. But sacred things, there was a strong feeling, should not be written down. So same applied to Buddha's teachings. It is said that right after the Buddha passed away, there was a concern among his immediate disciples that we all, kind of have a good idea, and for the sake of unity, also a good understanding and an agreement as to what the Buddha taught or did not teach. So we say, so they got together. They got together to, it is said, to recite from memory. And people during those times had incredible memory because spiritual texts had to be memorized. So they got together and they collected these teachings and passed them down through memory. It wasn't until a few hundred years later that these remembered texts, these oral texts, were put into writing. So where I'm drawing from for this series are from this earliest layer of the Buddhist texts that were collected in this early period. Just as a side note, just so you also understand where I'm coming from, I don't necessarily think that is the limit of what we could call the Buddha's teachings. Obviously, for those of you who know, I practice in a tradition that greatly emphasizes texts that, at least historically, came from a later period. But for me, I see enough continuity. I see that these are still teachings of the Buddha. So I'm not fundamentalist in insisting that only the earliest layer. But if we want to learn something about karma and kind of the historical Buddha's distinctive kind of contribution or understanding of the matter of karma, then I do think that it is justified that we go to the earliest layer of historical texts available to us. And this is the texts, at least the ones that are available in English. Right now, the most complete of this earliest layer comes from the Pali Canon. The Pali Canon is the formal canon of the Theravada tradition. And Theravada Buddhism is the Buddhism that is that dominates places like Thailand, Sri Lanka, Burma, Laos, Cambodia. There are also, from this earliest layer, texts preserved in the Chinese translation of Sanskrit and certain Tibetan translations of the Sanskrit. But those texts generally have not been translated into English, so we're not looking at them. And also then finally, if you want to follow up and read more about this, I mentioned that a very helpful resource is this website called Access to Insight. Access to Insight. And on there, all the Pali texts of the canon, Pali canon, almost all of it has been translated into English. And not only that, the main scholar monk responsible for that website, an American out in California, he has also written a number of essays and also a number of study guides on many of these key topics. And so, in fact, A lot of what I'm drawing from Bhikkhu Thanissaro, his study guides. Of course, I'm not claiming to giving credit where credit should be given, but his take on the material could be slightly different from how I'm talking about it. So don't be surprised if you go there and read his essays. There might be some differences, but that's good. That's fine. Yeah. Can we take away these texts from chairs? Thank you. If someone can collect the text, Jim, please. So last week, one of the points that I made last week is to emphasize how this notion that the Buddha spoke about karma and taught karma half-heartedly. Yeah? There is this idea, in fact, among quote-unquote secular Western Buddhists. And this is a fairly strong movement. People who have looked to Buddhism and are very happy and comfortable with certain aspects of Buddhism, but not at all happy or comfortable with other aspects. They see themselves as secular Buddhists, so not religious, not into the chanting, not into the mythology. Take all of that out. Or if at all, just look at that in a kind of secular humanist way. Teachings about karma, and especially about rebirth or multiple lifetimes, many would consider, oh, this is simply because the Buddha lived at a time where everybody believed that, therefore he also taught that. And with regards to that, two main positions. One position more flattering than the other. One position is to say, he was, after all, even though we sort of think he was awake, enlightened, he was, after all, a product of his times. So because his times believed in karma, then being a product of his times, he just, got swept along, believing that. But we know better, ha ha ha. There's that undertone, really, like I feel. We know better, ha ha ha. Now that we are enlightened, really enlightened, living in these times, how silly. But we'll put up with that because he has other things to say that we really like. Right? The other position is more that, not that he didn't know, but he knew. But because his audience was so caught up with the idea of karma and multiple lifetimes, if he came out right to say, no, these things don't matter, nobody would listen to him. So in order to fit in better, he spoke a vocabulary that his people expected him to speak. So this one is slightly more indulgent. But I would submit, and many Buddhists will say, there is really no way to really say that you are practicing Buddha's teachings if you don't take his teachings on karma and his teachings on many lifetimes, multiple lifetimes, seriously. Now again, I'm not saying that in a dogmatic way you have to. I'm saying give it a chance and see why it might be that it won't hold up that well, his teachings, if you don't take karma seriously and you don't take the idea of multiple lifetimes seriously. And I will try to kind of present this without, having you feel that it is an article of faith or belief that you have to subscribe to without good reason. Yes, it's still an article of faith or trust. Yeah? But if you're going to adopt it, I will say that it is possible to adopt it based on reasoning, based on kind of good consideration, that then I can kind of put myself, to accept this as something that is profitable or maybe beneficial, or more kind of the language that the Buddha used, it is skillful. It is skillful to subscribe to this particular view of why things happen, and also how it happens in some ways. In terms of how it happens, of course, it's not claiming to give you a scientific explanation of how things happen, but from within the Buddhist kind of understanding, how it happens in terms of the continuity of lifetimes. So last week, what we looked at then is first on karma. We didn't really talk that much about the continuity of lifetimes, which we'll look at a little bit today. But what we looked at last week is to start by asking what were the available ideas with regards to why things happen, or more specifically, why things that I consider either good or bad happens to me. Not so much why things happen as in why is the sun shining on that side and not that side, but rather why do good or bad things happen to me, with reason or without reason. So we looked at how in one place the Buddha taught, he says that it seems that there are these three positions that religious people, he says, tend to hold on to. And all three of them, he said, they are deficient. The first position, he says, is the idea that everything that happens, all that happens, the good and the bad things that happen to us completely because of past karma. And he rejected that. Then the second one, he says, everything good and bad that happens to us is the doing of an all-powerful God, or for that matter, an all-powerful power that is not me, over there, is responsible for all the good and the bad things that I experience. Third position, he says, are those who say, all good and bad things happen to us. Or rather, all good and bad things happen to us for no reason. For no reason. And all three of those positions he rejected. And when we looked more into that and asked, why did he reject the three? He didn't say to his audience, I rejected the three because when I woke up, when I became Buddha, through my power to see everything as it is, I saw it this way. So we get a sense of how he functioned as a teacher. He never said, because I said so, and because you trust me so much, therefore, I'm sure you would accept so. But as a teacher, he often used reasoning with whoever he was teaching. And so with regards to the issue of karma, or the issue of asking of why good or bad things happen to us, in that discussion, when he brought up those three positions, his main point was what? Can anyone remember? His objection.
Inactivity.
Sorry. Inactivity. So what does it mean, inactivity?
Like
you can't.
You feel like it's not worth doing.
Feel. That's key. He was concerned that if you subscribe to any of these three, that you feel that there is no meaning to choose one kind of action over another kind. Because karma has decided, fate has decided, no matter what I choose, it won't make a difference. If everything is karma ripening from the past, so anything I do or don't do now, let's just leave it to karma. And of course, we use that phrase. Let's just leave it to karma. He rejected that understanding of karma. A powerful force outside has determined this would render meaningful action pointless and impossible. The position of this happened for no rhyme or reason also renders action meaningless. So you can see that he was concerned about having people believe that it is possible to change our experiences. More specifically, it is possible for us to change whatever unpleasant experiences that we're experiencing now, that it's possible to change. And that to speculate too much about how it's the ripening of past karma and therefore there's nothing I can do about it, or even when I'm doing this, is it simply the ripening of my good karma that I'm doing something about it, or when I'm doing this, is it actually just some God that has determined that I will do this, and so everything that I do is already decided. And when people try to take him along those lines, when he talked about karma, he will say, you are now getting yourself walking deeper and deeper into a thicket of views that will get you all tied up, and it will lead to nowhere good. So he rejected those because he was primarily concerned about having people understand the possibility of acting at any point, that we could create karma and kind of put things in a certain context, put things along certain momentums, so certain directions that would make a difference. Then we also looked at the 6 prevalent views, or actually the non-orthodox view. In that case, he did not kind of address the mainstream view of his time. But these 6 are actually the 6 kind of emerging kind of views about why things happen. And so we went over those 6 views. Quickly, the first one is basically called non-action. And there it's the idea basically, if I could kind of, my read of that position is a position that says that ideas of like moral good or bad are essentially human constructs, that to bother ourselves with too much of that is taking us away from nature as it is. So it's kind of a form of naturalism that says that the best way to live, the most meaningful way to live, is to live naturally and not worry about these categories. And so the Buddha rejected that. The second one has this idea of, the second position does talk about multiple lifetimes. And in fact, presents this idea that all of us have already been allotted, or all of us are part of an evolutionary process whereby the soul would have to go through all of these rebirths, a finite number of rebirths that seems to be all fixed for every one of us. And it's evolutionary, you get better. Then what you should do is to understand that this is the thing and just let everything unfold. And do not try to do anything to speed up this process or to slow it down, but just to go. And so the example of, like, if you roll a ball of yarn, it will just unfurl until the whole ball unfurls, and then that's it. And so this second position, the Buddha also rejected and say, no, it will not undo itself. The third position is called annihilation, and this is sort of the idea that, and this is the materialist position, which is there's nothing after this life. All that we are just the elements. At death, all these elements go back to everything. So the good life now that we live is to live with this understanding and just be good people, basically. And then when it's over, it's all over. That's it. The Buddha also rejected that. This one, I think, comes closest to kind of the secular, position that we're familiar with. It says, yeah, be good people, and then that's it. After that, that's it. Don't worry about it. Then there is the position which is called non-relatedness, which perhaps bear resemblances to certain religious traditions, where here it says, and this is a particular Indian style, kind of theistic or soul-based tradition. The gist of it is saying that there is the soul and it's permanent. But in this system, there are 7 types of permanent substances. And these 7 types of permanent substances, 4 of them are physical: earth, wind, fire, and water. Then there is a physical then there is an immutable substance, permanent substance, called pleasure and pain, and then soul. 7. And it says that these 7 are actually not related. They superficially create the illusion that they are in this person. And then they gave the example, but even if you took a sword and slashed through, you cannot destroy the earth, you cannot destroy the wind, you cannot destroy the water, you cannot destroy the soul. And so you should have that understanding. So whether pain or pleasure is being experienced, understand that it's just pleasure, nothing else. It's called non-relatedness. And then he gave the position of the fourfold restraint, which is the tradition found among the Jains. Now, to be fair, this presentation of the Jain tradition is more a caricature of what Jains believe. And so here it talks about the fourfold restraint. I looked it up last week. I said, I don't know exactly what this is referring to. But here, as I look, it's more like a caricature of what the Jains believe. But it has to do with playing with the word restraint and water. They're kind of linked in Sanskrit or Pali, water and restraint. And then the idea that the emphasis in the Jain tradition on freeing the jiva, the eternal soul, from being in bondage. So we talked about how for them, although it's not presented in the handout, they weren't like explained in those terms, but for them it's like this idea that karma is everything that we do. Everything that we do, whether with intention, without intention, whether positive, whether negative, they all produce a type of substance that trapped us, that traps the jiva to the body. And so the ultimate in the spiritual, kind of a spiritual endeavor is to basically cease creating any and all karma. And the best way to die is to stop eating and drinking. And stop, because the karma of eating and drinking is one of the heavier types of karma, because it involves consuming other life forms, including vegetables. So one very extreme kind of faction of this tradition even says being vegetarian is not enough. You should only eat plants that have leaves that have fallen off the tree by themselves. Then you can eat that. So the ideal is to get more and more and more, or rather less and less and less involved in causing harm until you starve yourself to death. And that way you can free. Buddha rejected that as an extreme position. Finally, the last one is called evasion. And this one is not so much that they have a position. This is, they absolutely don't have a position, and they insist that you should not have a position either. When asked why things happen, it says, don't know, don't ask. Easier that way, better that way. So I mentioned this bumper sticker that I saw. It says, radical agnostic. Big words. And then underneath it says, I don't know and you don't know either. It's not just agnostic, but radical agnostic. I don't know and you don't know either. So this Buddha says, they are like these eel wrigglers, and they just wriggle themselves out of explaining anything. He rejected all 6 of these positions as not conducive. The common phrase is not conducive to the holy life, not conducive to a life of training. So instead, throughout his life, he gave what he considered to be conducive understanding to living a good life. So he shared with all the others of his time, those who accepted the word karma, he shared with them the understanding that actions produce results. We talked about how here we're talking about moral actions producing moral results. We're not talking about the effect of your action, the kind of the obvious effect of your actions. So, the obvious effect of my action of punching, Jimmy in the face is that, it'll be a bloody nose, it'll be very painful, and he'll be very upset. That is not the karmic effect. That's not the result that we're talking about. The result that we're talking about is the result that will boomerang back to me for having punched him in the face. That's what the result that we're talking about here. So alongside his contemporaries, other religious figures, Buddha accept that karma is about that. It's about that actions, these types of actions, produce results. Where he differed from some of them is his emphasis on intention. And so there's a quote from him that says, intention, I tell you, is karma. Intending, one does karma by way of body, speech, and intellect. So for him, intention was important. And so in contrast to the Jain position, where they felt that intention or not, your actions produce consequences. But here the Buddha emphasized that, no, it's only actions that are performed, that are carried out due to intentions. And then there he specifically isolates, he says, and particularly the intentions that are driven by the three poisons. For sure, they create negative. Those are what I call negative karma, he says. And what are the three poisons? Greed, ill intent, and confusion or ignorance. So any kind of intention fueled by these three poisons, then definitely karma is created. And the karma that is created, you can call negative karma. Actions are also karma if their intentions are free from greed. And when these intentions are free from greed, not powered by greed, not propelled by ill intent, not propelled by confusion, then they are positive karma. Then they are positive karma. Then when it comes to karma, the Buddha says, so there are some general characteristics of karma. One general characteristic of karma is said to be, it is inevitable. What does it mean by inevitable? Any ideas? The inevitability of karma.
You cannot escape it.
You cannot escape it. Say a little bit more.
So if you have created the conditions for something to happen, then something will happen.
Okay. So here, inevitable is that, yeah, actions never fail to produce an effect. Actions, karma, karmic actions will definitely produce karmic effects. But then that statement, later we will see, what it is saying is not so much that it will definitely produce a result. Here, when it says it will definitely produce a result, what does it mean? Okay, rephrase. Can we now have kind of like it will definitely produce a result unless what?
Unless
There's some intervention to make it.
There's some intervention, right? So intervention is possible. So it is not the case that once it is created, for sure, it will produce result.
causes and the conditions have to come together for the right.
The causes need to meet the right conditions, and then the conditions that are met may or may not be strong conditions, or also the notion that you could destroy the seed before it bears fruit, before it sprouts.
Then it's not inevitable.
It's not inevitable. But you find phrases when the Buddha says that. And that's when we have to interpret that and say, what does he mean there? And if you look at the context, there he's emphasizing, you see all these teachings that he gives, it's all in conversation. He never quite just gives a sermon. It's always in conversation with someone. So the places where he makes a pronouncement, therefore karma is inevitable, I can say it's always in a context where someone is saying, well, maybe it won't. Maybe it won't bear fruit. Maybe I don't have to worry about it. Then that is when he says, no, it will bear fruit. Later in other conversations, or not later, but elsewhere in other conversations, when someone says, I'm doomed, I'm doomed, I'm doomed, that's when he goes, no, you're not. Yes, very terrible things have been done. But you know what? You can still now do something to prevent the karmic results from coming.
Is he saying that you will prevent any karmic result, or just you can ameliorate the result?
In some cases, you can ameliorate. In some cases, you
Totally
can
wipe it out.
burn the seed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he does talk about burning the seeds.
Would it be right to say that the seed is inevitable, but the fruit, the result isn't?
No, like some places, he does say the fruit is inevitable. I think it's just we can't absolutize his statements.
Is it because the present moment has changed? In the original present moment, the karma is inevitable.
Yes.
Now later, it's a different present moment, and the karma is.
Well, that's like kind of
commentarial
commentarial gymnastics that they have to do later on.
In other words.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Karma before it was
yes, I understand. Yes.
Now it's a different present moment.
Yeah, that's just commentarial gymnastics.
What does that mean?
Huh?
What does that mean?
Gymnastics involves a lot of contorting bodies. So later, Buddhists have the burden of explaining away why Buddha said in this case is inevitable, and over there he says you can change it. I think that's just later Buddhists wanting.
Well, what seems important is that at any moment I don't feel defeatist about past karma. I say I have free will, I have intention, and let me couple that with intention.
Yes, and that's what the main thrust of his concern. But in occasions where people seem to say, I can deal with that later, then he takes a stronger position and say, this is going to come and you can't escape it.
Well, I meant hindsight, looking back.
Yeah, and so it's all about, we need to kind of take the larger picture and sort of interpret. Yeah. What was he trying to say there? To whom? You know, often what happens is with Buddhist tradition or any religious tradition, it's like the teacher is dead, so every single word now suddenly becomes like sacred and cannot be changed. And especially when they pick it out of context and line it all up, which is what they did later in the Abhidharma, they say, well, there are 4 qualities to karma. It is this, it is this, it is this, it is this. But after 200 years, right, people forgot, like, wait, what was the context when this was said? Now it has become like, you know, capital T truth. And it becomes Dharma. Yes, Buddha did say actions never fail to produce an effect. But should we go from there to the conclusion that karma cannot be changed? No. If karma cannot be changed, why even bother? Right? Why even bother? Like he says, then the holy life is not possible. Forget about it.
So we're cluttering up these statements when we try to draw connections, which some of us like me always do. We're better off without the connections and to just understand each in its own.
A thicket of views the Buddha warns against. A thicket of views are good if you understand, I think. Like put it in context and it'll give you like more kind of a more refined view of what's being said. So I'm not quite, like the forest tradition or Milarepa that says, I like ideas. Me, I'm just talking about me. So I also like to study, these things like that says, 4 characteristics of karma, But I think we go too far when we think that's the final word. It's not. It's a bunch of people later on trying to basically kind of be able to kind of give the dummies, guide to karma, the easy one, so that when people say, well, Hindus believe this, what do you all believe? Well, we believe in these 4 things, right? And because it seems easy, but whenever you do something like that, you take away from, the complexity of this topic, especially karma, because again and again the Buddha warned. He says, remember the 4 types of things that he says you should not think too much about?
Yeah, the imponderables.
The 4 imponderables, yeah, it'll make you crazy, he says. One is the extent of the Buddha's freedom. Don't, he says. It'll make you crazy. And the other one relevant here is exactly how an effect is related to a cause. You can't. Right? When you try to go into that, you'll get yourself into a thicket of views. But there are general things about karma that we need to be clear about. We cannot say, oh, I don't think about it. Right? So what we need to be clear about is this. There is no occasion where you can say, look, this person did something good and then bad things happened to him. Which a lot of times we kind of believe that. Or this person did something bad, look, he's having a good time. I know. Yes, that is a good case, that we say that. And also it's a good case to analyze because the Buddha actually said, here is your problem if you think cause and effect all is only about this lifetime. Then you can point to all those people and say, well, why should I live a moral life? I should learn from that guy. They're having a jolly good time. Actually, that conversation that we ended with last week, he said, here, I think I put it here. He actually said it. This is about rebirth, He said, if you limit everything to just here and now, here's your problem. And then you just say, well, doesn't matter. I just need to figure out, how to maximize my pleasure. Do it. Yeah, so he says, you need to be clear about this point. There is not, it's almost like I would say, he says, you should not believe that you can plant a mango seed and it will produce an apple tree. Even if it seems like, wait a minute, an apple tree has come up there. Yeah? It's almost like he's saying, you need to perhaps dogmatically reject that and say, no. Must be, somewhere in there, the mango seed is still hidden. It's just that the apple seed was there and I didn't see it. So I should not make this wrong connection. Now, right or wrong is based on what is a skillful way of framing our understanding. So it's almost like we cannot subscribe to a system of belief that says that doing bad things can result in good. And so in that sense, this is, in a way, it's not about capital T truth. It's about, right? It's about what should we value? Now, of course, as Buddhist, and I can speak only for myself, I would say this is grounded in the Buddha's having seen the capital T truth. That he woke up to what was real. But as a matter of like subscribing to it, I don't think we need to require that you believe that this is capital T truth. But rather to follow the way he presents it, the way he argues it with people. He doesn't whack it over their heads and say, I saw the truth already. And if you don't believe it, you just can't handle the truth. He doesn't threaten people with that kind of reasoning. He's always like, wait, think about this. So that, right? That karma is not mistaken. That's another way of putting it. Karma is not mistaken. And that when karma, bright karma and dark karma, he says, when they ripen distinctly. Distinctly. So some analogy given is that if you have a handful of grains that consists of barley, wheat, and rice, and then you hurl it into a plot, when it ripens, when it sprouts, they're not hybrids. The wheat will be the wheat, the barley will be the barley, the rice will be the rice. Now, if you happen to have a lot of rice and only a few, wheat berries, superficially, when you look at here, you say, oh, that's a field of, barley. Did I say barley?
Rice.
Rice. That's yeah. So it's like you can say, oh, that's a field of rice, right? And then you can say, oh, so it doesn't matter if you mostly just plant rice and you have some wheat, because the wheat is not going to ripen. No, it's not that it's not going to ripen. It's just that superficially, when you stand far away, you don't see that it's there. So in that way, we have to be careful about our karma. Then in this understanding also, and this is the hard part, I'll phrase it strongly. There are no innocents. There are no innocents. That means that, when we experience suffering, right, it is likely the ripening of karma. And that, you can't say, I'm sinless. I'm a good person. This is not possible. But neither could you use it to tell somebody else. Oh, this is your karma ripening. Suck it up. Because karma, the teaching on karma, isn't taught for us to go tell somebody else why they are experiencing something unpleasant. Later, we will look at how the Buddha's teaching about the inevitability and the certainty of karma right? In this sense that we've talked about. Interestingly, is taught within a system where there is no eternal abiding soul that is experiencing the results of karma. That's the interesting part. That's the part that we often miss. Then we suffer more when we have a kind of normal idea of me being a soul, me being an unchanging entity, and then add the idea of karma, then it becomes very heavy. Yeah. So today we want to look at more kind of the teachings about, what is the self? How is self produced? Kind of like you could say the wisdom teachings. Now these are often the kind of teachings that a lot of people like about Buddhism, but they tend to yank it out of, or to separate karma and rebirth on the one side and the wisdom teachings on the other side, and say, this is just culture. This is just cultural stuff. We don't need this. This, the real stuff we want. But what we're going to look at this afternoon is how actually these two are tied together. That they are connected. And that if you have one without the other, you're going to run into some problems that the Buddha actually addressed. That they have to go hand in hand. So questions or comments so far? Anything to share? Thoughts? Rambles? That's good too. Yeah.
Is there any way
Professor.
to see which bad actions I might have done, what bad karma they resulted in, or do you just know when something bad happens to you, some bad karma back there somewhere is ripening?
There are places in the sutras where it does say, generally. For example, it said that if you have a bad health as a constant issue, then it's related to having caused harm to others, physical harm to others. Now, and again, inordinately, Buddhists through the centuries have focused on that or things like that. And so then it even leads to, last week I said, I have so many Buddhist friends, even teachers, who will say, oh, no, the Buddha taught, if you squish a bug, you will be squished. If at some lifetimes you use a 6-inch blade, to gut someone, watch out, a 6-inch blade is coming to gut you at some point. Because again, they how do they come to that? It's on that statement that, karma is unmistaken, right? Similar causes produces similar result, but like literally, right? So then they find passages in the sutras where it says, where Buddha said to someone, your illness, a constant illness here, is because of da-da-da-da-da. And then Buddha tells the story. And that's when, yes, Buddha is invoking faith. He says, in the past lifetime, you have this, or that, right? There, I think, if we look closer at the material, when he uses that kind of explanation, it is not, to me, really giving that person an explanation as to why he or she is suffering from, bad health now. In fact, he is saying in those instances that, therefore, now, even as you go see and consult a doctor, you need to also pay more attention to creating karma that supports and protect lives, feed people, provide medicine for others. And so he's using that as an opportunity to say, now go do good, and do the kind of good that is related to possibly the karmic effect of the problems that you're facing now. So to that degree, yes, when you're doing this and Buddhists, like, oh, it's because in the past life, and then going, oh, therefore now I should be careful about. Yeah.
So what you just said reminds me of metta. So it's like that how the practice of metta comes about. I mean, in that regards of then feeling what you're feeling, but then, in the sense of wishing better for yourself or for others. How does that relate?
Yeah, yes. And I mean, practicing metta meditation or whatever meditation is a kind of karma, right? You're creating now positive karma as a way to counteract the negative. So in that sense, applying the antidote is a lot more along those lines.
So the truth is,
The truth? Which
I
one?
mean,
Just teasing.
Is that we really can't know, and it doesn't really matter that we know. I mean, we just take the opportunity to find ways to turn it into a more positive.
Yes.
So this is
Right.
We believe the process. We don't have to understand.
Don't
the
have to
process.
Yeah.
don't have to know the
Yes.
So does correlating good deeds, are they more beneficial than if your health is bad than just going out and I don't know, doing other good karma that's not related to health? Does it need to be a correlation?
But it seems like there is a correlation, more so I think for a bigger picture kind of mental state, rather than, I can't speak to exactly the actions, right? Although the text seems to suggest that. I'm trying to step back and say, I think it's more about, then you become more, it's more specific, kind of just, and therefore more powerful than generally just do good things, right? It gives you more a sense of, and I think that is part of the healing. That I might have deprived someone of the psychology. I might have deprived someone of medicine in the past, and therefore all the medicine that I'm taking now is not bearing any effect. Let me go provide good medicine to people now. And I think that psychology actually helps us to heal better.
It has intention in it.
It has very strong intention. Psychic placebo, which is the best kind of medicine, right? It's like when people say that's placebo effect, it's like, exactly, yay. We have been taught to reject placebo effect because pharmaceuticals can't sell them. That's being cynical. But it's like walking is so good for you, but they can't sell it. They're not going to put money into research on how good walking is. Yeah, unless they can tie it to the treadmill or fancy shoes or whatever, right? So there's a movement like to walk and to run bare feet. You're not going to get a lot of support, to do research on that, because how can somebody sell bare feet? You can't. Other questions? Yeah.
Does regret play a part in any of this process of
Yes,
thinking?
yes. So in some of does regret play a part? Actually, yes. It says that So there is one section, and I don't want to go into too many of the later material, even though I find it very helpful. So maybe in the future we could do something, a course on focus more on like how to purify karma, which we're not talking about here so much, you know. But here it does say in later material, right, in the Abhidharma, in the commentary and everything, they go back and they see, you know, and so I would say sometimes they're more successful than other times. So in these later teachings that to kind of draw out, you know, what could the Buddha mean, and, you know, kind of arrange a system, right? Buddha wasn't a systematizer. Jesus wasn't a systematizer. Then Paul came along. Then whoever came along, right? It's the people who comes later who have to systematize things because we like it clean, right? So it says that, for example, what determines how strong a particular karma is? So that question arose later on. And so then Buddhist disciples, Buddhist scholars had to go back to this text and look for all those places. And I think that we would do a more effective job today because, you know, we have search engines. Back then, they just had to rely on, you know, their memory, you know, and where to draw from. You know, now we could, like, you know, draw out everything and line up and say, you know, the algorithm and everything will kind of, you know, come up with like a good search, you know. But there it says, remember, I think it's 4. I don't know if I can remember all 4, but you get an idea. It says, an action is extremely powerful when it is done to someone who is spiritually highly developed. Both positive and negative actions done towards these persons produce stronger effect. Yeah. Both positive and negative. Actions that are done to those who have been kindest to you also produces correspondingly stronger or weaker effects. So in other words, for example, to be ungrateful, yeah, to a random person who has done you some good, and to be ungrateful to your parents, the karmic effect is different. Then the karma is also different if after completing the action, you go, yes! Or you go, ay, ay, ay. Gosh, why did I do that? That's the regret question. Both good and bad. You have just given away, you know, your lunch, and you go, yes! That person will be so happy. Then the effect of that karma is strong. In this case, strongly good. But if, you know, you have given away, God, being generous is not a good thing. I have to control myself in the future. Then it's also correspondingly strong.
What about something that I often do? I mean, I give in different ways, but I go through phases of giving food. And sharing. Sharing the big word. Yeah. But if I know or feel that I have an enemy or someone who's been difficult to be around or with, I make a point to give them something.
That's good.
And I can usually walk away and go, wow, that was, you know, but I'm really
but that's
glad,
not regret.
But I'm really glad I did it.
Yes, that's not regret.
I don't always feel great about it. And I often question, like,
you must not be Asian.
Why did I, you know,
I'm like, good, I'm giving him, now they have the burden. Yes! Passive aggressiveness is not a negative in Asia. We call that being refined.
What's the fourth one? You said 4.
I said, I don't remember all 4. I can go look for it. Then they also say, this is more random, yeah, how, you know, the longer you wait, the stronger the effect. What does that mean? The stronger the effect will become. Specifically, this is related to negative karma that you've created. If you let it sit there longer without purifying it, it grows stronger and stronger and stronger. Likewise, the good that you produce, if you don't do the opposite, regret it, the longer it stays, yeah, the stronger it becomes. So here it has to do with now psychology, the imprints that it leaves on your mind. And so back to the thing, you know, like a very practical thing. Now, I've been talking a lot about like our sustaining membership program, right? So here, actually, someone in this room actually asked me this question before and said, yes, I know that it doesn't matter, you know, when it comes to the total figure that the center gets, you know, in a year from me, in a sense, whether I give it in 10 installments, 12 installments, or one time, right? That's how much effectively the center is going to get. Right? And the person said, now let's bracket that aside. Now let's talk about the spiritual effect. Yeah. And it is true, according to the teachings, it's better to give it in 12 installments that one time. Granted that you pay attention in the 12 installments and not just like mechanically say, oh, I'll do it 12 because it's better. But rather to kind of have the occasion to remember every first of the month, yeah, I give to something good. Psychologically, it says it's good because we don't get reminded. And in the Buddhist context, you don't need to deprive yourself of being reminded that you have done something good. We don't see that as a negative. In some cultures, that's seen as a negative. I don't know. I've done something good. Yeah. Like with really kind of, you know, maybe that's, you know, in reaction to, on the other hand, those who want, you know, the good that they've done, right? So then we swing the other direction, like, I want to do good, I don't want to think about it anymore. What the Buddha taught is that actually, when you've done something positive, you should enhance that by rejoicing. The yes! And then when you've done something negative, you should enhance it with regret. Regret is a good thing when you know how to use it. Regret is a bad thing if it means I am doomed, nothing I can do anymore. But regret is good because if you know how to apply it to some unskillful thing that you've done, and you say, no, I really didn't like that doing that. You know, circumstances. Not related, well, related to karma, sort of like, there is a mental faculty in Buddhist analysis of the mind called shame that is actually good. Okay, you know, normally we think shame is bad, but it says that shame and regret are the pre and the post that will prevent us from creating negative karma. Yeah, not wanting to be censured by people we care about or the community, that's a good kind of shame. Again, a certain person is shameless. There, that positive mental faculty of shame doesn't operate, you know? And so they do things shamelessly. Definitely regret seems to be out of the picture too. Then very negative karma is created, for sure. So Buddha said, no, shame is good if applied skillfully. Then no, it should not. So let's take a break now, and then when we come back, we'll look at this handout for today. So the handout today. So often, right? So we talk about like the Buddha or Siddhartha became enlightened or awakened. So we talk about that. And Buddha means to be awake. But rarely do we really learn about what it means that he was awakened. Or in what way, what was the content of Siddhartha's awakening? And to complicate matters, the early translators that used English chose this loaded word, enlightened. And maybe at that point when they were doing that, it was helping Buddhism to be accepted and kind of aligned with, right, this other intellectual, awakening or whatever, called the Enlightenment in Europe. It has also really complicated this understanding of what makes a Buddha a Buddha. And maybe because of that, we all have our own imagination of what Buddha means, right? And awake, and often I think certain things about European Enlightenment, like certain commitments, certain intellectual commitments there, have been projected onto the Buddha. And then we think, oh, it must be the same. So it's useful, should be instructive for us to again go back to some of the earliest recorded writings that we have that actually goes into what the content of this awakening was about. And then when we look at that, we will see how the issue of karma and the issue of rebirth and the issue of like the more profound things like the Four Noble Truths, emptiness, selflessness, that these three are tied together. So if you look at this section that is Siddhartha's awakening. So it is said that, so the Buddha discussed later in his life, he was asked, what happened underneath that Bodhi tree? What happened there? Could you tell us, what were the insights that you gained? What did you awaken to? And he says that basically there were three successive kind of insights, awakening, that completely changed him as a result of directly perceiving these three specific knowledges. that he gained in that night. That then the next morning, it said the first thing he saw was the star, the morning star, and then he was Buddha. So here, let's look at this. It says, when the mind was thus concentrated, purified, bright, unblemished, rid of defilement, pliant, malleable, steady, and attained to imperturbability. So these are all required. So sometimes when we ask in meditation, what are we aiming for in Buddhist meditation? These are the qualities. To make your mind concentrated, purified, bright, unblemished, rid of defilement, pliant, malleable. Yeah, it's interesting, it doesn't move, imperturbability, but it's steady, but then it's pliant and malleable. So when the mind has become that, then what happens? What did he do? He said, I directed it, the mind, to the knowledge of recollecting my past lives. I recollected my manifold past lives, 1 birth, 2, 5, 10, 50, 100, 1,000, 100,000, many eons of cosmic contraction, many eons of cosmic expansion, many eons of cosmic contraction and expansion. Here he's talking about how the universe contracted and expanded. And this is kind of the Buddhist view of how the world cycles through periods of contraction and expansion. And when he recollected, when he looked into all these past lives, there I had such a name, belonged to such a clan, had such an appearance, such was my food, such was my experience of pleasure and pain, such the end of my life. Passing away from that state, I reappeared there. There too I had such a name, belonged to such a clan, had such an appearance, such was my food, such was my experience of pleasure and pain, such the end of my life. Passing from that state, I reappeared here. So he saw all his past lives, according to him. Thus I remembered my manifold past lives in their modes and details. This was the first knowledge I attained in the first watch of the night. Ignorance was destroyed, knowledge arose, darkness was destroyed, light arose, as happens in one who is heedful, ardent, and resolute. So in the first watch of the night, he gained direct knowledge, it is said, into all his past lifetimes. More importantly, the details of those lifetimes. He could see clearly. He could see clearly his karma, in other words. That such was the kind of pleasure he experienced in that lifetime. Such was the kind of pain that he experienced in that lifetime, and so on and so forth. So back to your question, Trent. No, there is no Buddhist therapy based on past life regressions, but there are claims that, someone like the Buddha and some of his, more famous disciples had the ability to see clearly. And so this is a matter of faith, sure. And it is based on this that we say, therefore, the Buddha had enough information about how this works. And then he spoke to us according to each of our ability to absorb this information. That he did see reality as it is. And part of what he saw was all his previous lifetimes. Now, of course, by extension, it means other people too have all these lifetimes. But here, one could say that the first knowledge that he gained was the knowledge on karma, the workings of karma. The workings of karma insofar as his own person is concerned. The next thing, when the mind was thus concentrated, the same list, then now I directed it to the knowledge of the passing away and the reappearance of beings. I saw by means of the divine eye, which is basically saying clairvoyance, purified and surpassing the human, beings passing away and reappearing. And I discern how they are inferior and superior, beautiful and ugly, fortunate, unfortunate, in accordance with their karma. These beings who were endowed with bad conduct of body, speech, and mind, who reviled the noble ones, held wrong views, and undertook actions under the influence of wrong views, with the breakup of the body after death, have reappeared in the plane of deprivation, a best destination, a lower realm, hell. But these beings who were endowed with good conduct of body, speech, and mind, who did not revile the noble ones, who held right views and undertook actions under the influence of right views, with the breakup of the body after death, have reappeared in a good destination, a heavenly world. Thus, by means of the divine eye, purified and surpassing the human eye, I saw beings passing away and reappearing, and I discern how they are inferior and superior, beautiful and ugly. In other words, all the differences in accordance with their karma. How we are all the infinite differences that we all have, even as humans, all has to do with the complexity of the different types of karma and when certain karmas are ripening, and that complexity is what produces all the differences. And he saw that too. So not only he saw how karma worked out within himself, he saw also how karma worked out for others. This was the second knowledge I attained in the second watch of the night. Ignorance was destroyed, knowledge arose, darkness was destroyed, light arose, as happens in one who is heedful, ardent, and resolute. Then, when the mind was thus concentrated, again that whole list, I directed it to the knowledge of the ending of the affluence. I discerned, as it had come to be, that this is stress, that this is the origination of stress, dukkha, suffering, normally translated as suffering, stress. This is dukkha. This is the origination of dukkha. This is the cessation of dukkha. This is the way leading to the cessation of dukkha. These are effluents. This is the origination of effluents. This is the cessation. And this is the way leading to the cessation of afflictive emotions, of kleshas. My heart, thus knowing, thus seeing, was released from the affluent of sensuality, released from the affluent of becoming, released from the affluent of ignorance. With release, there was knowledge. Released, I discerned that. Birth is ended, the holy life fulfilled, the task done. There is nothing further for this world. There is nothing further for me to do in this world. This was the third knowledge I attained in the third watch of the night. Ignorance was destroyed. Knowledge arose. Darkness was destroyed.
I don't know what the word fluent means.
Professor?
Outpouring.
Outpouring.
Outflowing. Yeah, it's a technical Buddhist term. And outflowing means like, in the Buddhist technical term, our minds are constantly seeking external engagement. So much so that it's not actually even engaging the outside. It's engaging the projections that it projects onto the outside. Yeah. So it's outflowing. So the outflow of sensuality, the outflow of becoming, wanting to become, not at rest, constantly, and the outflow of ignorance, of confusion. So Buddhas are called those with no outflows. It's related to kind of like the idea of that famous kind of definition of what is a human body. It's a body, it's a skin bag with 9 holes, and stuff are just flowing out continuously. And most of life is about, waste management.
Gosh, it's so crude.
You don't want to hold it in.
What?
You don't want to hold it in.
You don't want to hold it in, and you don't want it blocked either. But to no longer have any outflows. Not because you're holding them in, but no more flowing. Dried up, finished. Yeah, so here we see, like the earliest description of what being awake means involves these 3 things. Now, if we could disagree with that and say, no, that's not what awaken means, well, then why even bother looking at Buddhist sources? This is how it defines being awake. So I don't know how you can justify, like, no, those things are, no, it's not really what the Buddha really was interested in talking about. Everything was linked to that. Because coming back to then the question of, what does the Buddha said is our existential problem? Our existential problem is the problem of dukkha, of stress, translated here, suffering. And the first noble truth, that there is suffering, there is dukkha, there is stress, right? Now, where does stress or suffering come from? Suffering is the result of, in this case, right, our actions that are unskillful is what produces dukkha. So if we don't want to experience dukkha, then we have to do something about our actions. That's about karma. So then, general principles of how karma works are given. The things that we talked about. What constitutes karma? What makes karma stronger or weaker? How karma is unmistaken? How we should not be. So there's a beautiful kind of example given. Like he says that karma follows us like shadow. And specifically, he says karma and our actions are like a bird and its shadow. When that bird is flying really high from the earth, it seems like the bird doesn't have a shadow, but the shadow is always there. As it comes down lower and lower and lower, and when it hits the ground, the shadow is right there. So this is Buddha's way of saying, don't kid yourself and think that karma doesn't ripen. As well, he says, don't be discouraged in thinking that the good that you are able to do is not going to bear their fruits. Don't give up. Like that bird, it's a matter of how far. When it finally has to come down, the shadow is right there. And in terms of the shadow, exactly the shape of the body, the shape of the shadow. No discrepancy. One of the things that we talked about last week, which I should point out in case those of you who weren't here last week, is another thing about karma is it also says that don't think that one of the things that Buddha criticizes, it says that don't have that idea that exactly how that karma is created, then definitely that's how it is going to be experienced. He says that is only true if there are no mitigating factors. He says it could be, for example, He gave a few examples. The explanation that we looked at last week was, he says, a trifling act that is unskillful or evil. Evil in Buddhist means productive of pain to someone else. So a trifling act of evil done by someone who is developed spiritually, has stability of mind, has contemplated their body, meaning understood the nature of their body. In other words, he actually says, a trifling negative act done by a spiritually developed person would have a lesser result than a trifling negative act done by someone who is uncultivated. That's really interesting. We tend to think, if someone is spiritually cultivated and they've done something negative, we are so outraged.
That's true.
Yeah, you ought to know better, right? That's a whole different attitude. Here is actually saying, no. Of course, you should know better too. That statement is based more like you are a model to other people, so you should know better. So in other places where Buddha talks about, the qualities of a teacher, he will say the same thing. But the psychology behind of is to point out here that actually here Buddha is saying why he said that, because it makes sense, because when you are generally stable and generally you have the right view, the right understanding of things, but when you make the wrong decision, the effect is not so strong because you have power to control it. As opposed to, it's sort of like saying someone who has real control, right? If they slip and take one drink because they're alcoholic, but because they have trained so well, it has a little bit of a bearing on them. Maybe that person is going to recovery meetings, in that sense, cultivated. One slip, there is that to protect this person, as opposed to someone who doesn't even go to recovery or don't even think they have a problem. One slip, the consequences are grave. That's what this means. But it can also see how the Buddha is always emphasizing the positive side. Don't give up. As long as you can cultivate your heart and make it better, no matter what negative, if it's already being done, there's nothing you can do about it except to be more prepared for when it ripens. So that's what he means by, it is not the case that when an action is produced, that it will be experienced exactly the same way. See, in other contexts, he would say that. And that is when he wants people to understand, right? Good produces good, bad produces bad. Harmful produces harm, helpful produces helpful. That's when he said that. But in another place, that's when, along the lines of Bill, what you said is actually true. He's saying, that person who created that act here doesn't remain as the same person. And that person could get worse, then the consequences become stronger. Or the person could have gotten better, and the consequences would be a lot less. So it is said that the Buddha himself died of food poisoning. Dysentery was why he died. I mean, he was also very old at that point. So the actual cause of death was food poisoning. And the Buddha actually tells the story and said, this is because in the previous lifetime, as a negligent doctor, he prescribed the wrong medicine for a whole village and killed a whole village of people. But he said, if he had not achieved Buddha, and that karma were to ripen, it will not just be food poisoning. It will be a terrible, terrible death. But because he's already Buddha, then it only ripened as food poisoning for him. Yeah. And so this point, then in that, then the analogy he gave is, he said, say you have a spoonful of salt, and then you put it into a glass. Is that water salty or not? And it's like, yeah, of course it's salty. He says, now say you have that same spoonful of salt, but you put it into a pond. Is the water in the pond going to be salty or not? No. Likewise, he said. So we might have created a lot of negative karma in past life, which nothing we can do about that. But we need to know that we have. What we can do now is make ourselves a pond, a lake, an ocean. Yes?
With what you're saying about someone who has a spiritual practice and recovery program, for example, is there a specific, and that not having as much of a damaging effect on them from losing their sobriety as if someone who had no training? Is there a specific?
Oh no, I was just kind of using an example.
But in terms of like I go to the refuge recovery program that comes here, and there are people who lose their sobriety and they go through a lot of shame.
Oh,
and
yes.
It's hard for them to keep on going.
Right.
To get back up.
Right.
So
I think, no, I guess my example was just trying to say how if you have cultivated your mind.
Yeah. Is that specifically in the text? That part, what you're saying? Right
if you have cultivated your mind?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Last week's, actually, we'll get you the hand. Okay. Oh, you already sent, in there. Okay. He gave the example. If you have cultivated, Buddha wasn't using a recovery example.
Yeah.
But about cultivated.
But I want to share this with
you. Yeah. Oh, good, yes. So, yeah. Because you have cultivated, so you should not feel, And of course, this is also the dynamics of the group, I don't know anything about it. I would imagine the more loving the group is, then the less likely someone's going to feel. Of course, in the end, also people feel whatever they feel. And cannot feel responsible for it. But I would imagine the more loving the group is, then the more accepting. People don't need to feel that. But again, it's complicated. But yes, the Buddha said that. Because. So this is when I think it's helpful, for beyond issues of addiction, like those of us who are trying to be spiritual, that kind of negative shame is not helpful. To think, oh, I should know better, but rather to say, I have the resources. Yes, I slipped, but that's not the whole picture. The good news is I have the resources. So the effect of this slip, I should be able to pull myself up with the help of others, right? Or the group or whatever, much quicker. And this is also related to, I think, us not wanting to be flaunting our spiritual or our religiousness. And so I remember I talked about this, like when the election results first came out, and many of us walking around like, zombies and feeling miserable and also feeling like, of course we have to feel this way, right? If we don't feel this way, there's something wrong, right? Then I had a friend that came to visit, is not American, but Dharma practitioner, so has some distance, and she saw, what was going on. She said to me, she said, you should remind them that they have taken refuge. And so when this kind of karma ripens, you should not wallow the same way that other people who don't have refuge are suffering. But you see, we don't talk about that because we don't want to flaunt, like, I'm spiritual, I'm impervious to this. Sure, yeah, I get that. But sometimes we forget, like, no. So this friend said, we have refuge.
You don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah, you don't have to do that anymore. You have a choice now. Not that you don't understand other people's suffering, you do. But now you have the tools. Now apply the tools. And that's the meaning of having taken refuge. You have the whole set of tools now. Now is the time to apply that and make a difference. In the same way, when you have cultivated your mind, and part of the cultivation is about being scrupulous, being attentive to karma. But it doesn't mean to be a victim of karma and to think of karma as such a judgment system that is going to get you no matter what. No, that's not what the Buddha taught. Buddha taught about causes and effects and the complexity of causes and effects, which we'll look at next. Yeah. So on the next page, actually look at identity and continuity first. A certain Brahmin asked, "Now then, Master Gautama, is the one who acts the same one who experiences the results of the act?" Then the Buddha, to say the one who acts is the same one who experiences is one extreme. Brahman, then Master Gautama, is the one who acts someone other than the one who experiences. The Buddha, to say the one who acts is someone other than the one who experiences is the second extreme. Avoiding both of these extremes, the Tathagata, referring to himself, he sometimes talks in the third person, teaches the Dharma by means of the middle. Some are more qualified to speak that way than others. Oh, inescapable, our karma. And here he says, from ignorance as a requisite condition, come fabrications. From fabrications as a requisite condition comes consciousness. From consciousness as a requisite condition comes name and form. From name and form as a requisite condition come the sixth sense media, all the way down to from clinging as a requisite condition comes becoming. From becoming as a requisite condition comes birth. From birth as a requisite condition, then aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair come into play. Such is the origination of this entire mass of stress and suffering. The next part is the reverse of that. Now from the remainderless fading and cessation of that very ignorance comes the cessation of fabrications. From the cessation of fabrications comes the cessation of consciousness, all the way unto such is the cessation of this entire mass of stress and suffering. Now, I know, you're like, what? The scripture doesn't have the Brahmin going, what? Apparently the Brahmin got it. This is what we call the 12 interdependent links of origination, which is, in a nutshell, is the Buddha's way of experiencing Genesis, but not in the sense of how the world came to be, but in our moment-to-moment experience of the world, how the world is constantly being produced. And the mechanism here, we are not going to go into the exact details of this, but the main point here is it's a chain of causes and effects. Because of this, then this. Because of this, then this. Because of this, then this. Now, note what is really kind of pretty, seemingly kind of linear, right? Because of this, this. Because of this, this, right? But here is, when you zoom into that picture, in every moment of that, there are all these possibilities. Right? So this could also lead to this, which then will 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 lead to this. So it's So here, the fundamental question the Brahmin is asking is it the same or a different? Because that's all we are capable of thinking. It's either the same person that created the cause that will experience the effect, or a different person. So that's related to a very solid understanding of what the self is. Right? But here Buddha says, those are not the only two options. Either is or isn't. They are the two extremes. So here is the question. The French Broad River. Is it the same river or a different river? Yesterday and today and tomorrow.
Yes and no.
So not either or, right?
Yeah.
To say that it is the same is obviously not true. Nothing actually on that river remains the same. Forget about yesterday and today. In any moment, at any point, the banks are being modified by the water that is flowing through. No single drop of water remains. So to say that it is the same is one extreme. To say that it is different is to say, yesterday you went to French Broad and today you're like, wait, where did the French Broad go? That's obviously not the case, right? I mean, you could still tell your friend, hey, let's meet there at 5. We're going to go, floating down that river. And so it's also not different. So what is it? It's a continuity. Yeah? It's a process that is related. So when it comes to the question of, is it the same or a different person bearing the karma? There are aspects of it that it is the same, as in this is the same continuity. But to think of it as same, as if, right? The person who created this action remains unchanging for the next 20 years. That's not the case. I mean, forget about different lifetimes, even within one lifetime, right? As we look back at our actions, it's like, yeah, I made that decision. And here I am retiring from this job now. Right? You made that decision, but it's not the same person that trained for this job and the person that retired from this job. The person who retired from this job, if it is unskillful, and perhaps because overcome by suffering, might blame himself for having trained in this job. At the end of a very unsatisfying, retirement, might blame himself. Oh, I should have. At the same time, if you do the opposite, right, to say that it's completely different, but that is also not true, because it is, a specific person that's retiring from this and not someone else. So the Buddha is trying, I would say, one could take, and certainly, Buddhists that came later, many of them took this to try to figure out, exactly the mechanics of this. But I think the bigger lesson here is, don't be so rigid about. Understand that this teaching about karma and how it is unmistaken is also given within a context where selfhood is understood as a process rather than structure. And that process is dynamic. And therefore karma is dynamic. And if we have a very static understanding of self, then this self has a lot of burdens to carry. For all the regrets that we can regret about to no end. Again, when all of that happens, it deprives the possibility of acting now to make a difference. So a negative karma created in the past is ripening now, right? As it ripens now, if you have the view that, no, nothing can be done, the way it is created is the way in which it will be experienced, right? Then you're at the mercy of that moment. But if you have the understanding that what was created, the way it ripens is it will ripen in consonance with the one who is experiencing it now. Then the one who is experiencing now can change how this is experienced. And can change how this is experienced. And that's part of that process of purifying the language that we sometimes use. Purifying is not literally like getting rid of it, but it's reframing our experience of this that normally would be unpleasant and painful. But if we experience it as, this is the result of actions created in the past, I need not blame anyone, including myself. Then when that negative ripens, yeah, you still like have a cold or have a terrible cold, but you don't create further negative karma out of this. And then in the Mahayana training, we say, if you have the capacity to then say, let the pain that I'm experiencing now relieve other people of their pain. Then this can actually turn into an occasion for the creation of positive karma, so that you are completely purified and cut off. Because the pernicious nature of karma, and so that's why here we don't see karma as something created by benevolent power or God to help us, because actually the pernicious nature of karma is that like produces like. So when you experience pain, you tend to create more pain, unless you do the opposite. Unless you do the opposite. So actually someone who is being tortured to death, we say that's really terrible. But from a karma perspective, it's not only terrible that they're being tortured to death, but in those moments of torture, most likely what will happen is they will have intense hate at the torturer. And that has created more negative karma to ripen. Is it fair? No, it's not. And that's why karma is, in a way, a problem to be solved by being Buddha. But the good news of that too is that when it's happening, something negative, it can be stopped, purified. The bad news is when the good is happening, it can also be stopped. Sometimes due to good karma, right? Something pleasant presents itself. But instead of experiencing the pleasant experience and create more future good karma, we do the opposite, which just seems to be more easy. I want this. I don't want others to have it. Then greed is cultivated. So this view of the person, the Buddhist view of the person, is an important piece that works together with karma and understanding of karma. You can see, I would say, how the Buddhist view of the individual as a process, like self is always self-making, right? It's constantly making itself as a process. If that teaching, right, gets divorced from karma and the emphasis on paying attention to karma, because each of us are heirs, the Buddha said this, to our own karma, right? Only we inherit the karma that we have created. Your karma cannot be given to your children, and you cannot get your parents' karma, because there were religious traditions in India that believed that. But here, no, it says, we are heirs of our own karma. Now, if the teaching about, the self being a process that is not exactly the same person is let loose without the teaching on karma, that could lead to problems. It doesn't matter what I do. All that, in the future is not me. Yes.
Perhaps this is an imponderable, but
it all depends on whether it'll make you crazy or not.
Okay, it kind of is, but but in the instance to say that you are not an heir to your parents' karma, but to imagine that their karma affects yours, let's say, for example, like how does that relationship work?
Easy, that's a ponderable.
Okay.
Your particular karma and their particular karma is meeting together. So it's not the case that, the good that they have carried, that they have done, comes to you. Conventionally, you could say that, we say, you're born in such and such a family with such and such a neighborhood and all of that. But we would say that it's your similar karmas that have brought you together. But nonetheless, the skillful moral actions, unskillful, we individually are still. Yeah. Then, we can say, well, the DNA and all of that, we say, well, that's also just the how, not the why. Those are the, the elements that come in play. So like when negative karma manifests, it manifests according to the laws of nature. It doesn't work outside of the laws of nature. So genetic, all of that. And also, what's we understand from sociology and psychology, all those rules operate. Don't think that that is like counter karma. I think one of the problems, right, these science denials, right, the religious, they think that either God or it's like confusing the how question and the why question and insisting that it's one or the other. But here I think Buddhism is like, oh no, yeah, the how, yeah, we all can go figure it out. Buddha only talks about the why.
What about societal culture, like we are experiencing now, societal karma?
They call it collective karma.
Collective.
Yeah.
I can see the micro in that, and how you relate to what happens makes a difference to you and to the people you're interacting with. But what might have caused this mess?
One of the imponderables.
But it would be so nice to know.
Well, I think we can talk a lot about the how. Oh, that's quite clear. What got us here? The how.
Well, I can go back to at least 2008 and the responses.
So the how, right? So how we can talk about. That's not an imponderable. As for a karma question, right? The general principles we can talk about, but we don't know whether it was the case that all of us were in a previous lifetime together creating this, or that our different ways of creating different karmas have pulled us all together into being in this situation.
Wow.
Yeah, that's unclear. Yeah, collective karma isn't just a case that collectively we created there and collectively we experience here. Because if that was the case, you'll never meet anyone new. Right? And that can't be the case. But again, yeah, I have Buddhists who talk like that, like, oh, collective karma. And then it's like, forever, there's just those 7 characters. Yes.
It would be safe to say, though, that if we had all become Buddhists, then this mess wouldn't exist. So we could at least say that the problem is that we're not Buddhists.
No. Clearly, you're not born in a Buddhist culture. Let me disabuse you of that notion.
He needs to read our book.
Right. No.
No, I said Buddhas.
Buddhas. Oh, yeah, right. If we're Buddhas, yeah, of course, this problem won't exist. Oh, I thought you said Buddhists. Oh, okay, good. That's another one of my bumper stickers, right? Remember? Only Buddhists, not Buddhas.
Disclaimer.
Yeah, that's my Buddhist version of a bumper sticker that I've actually seen that says only forgiven, not perfect. Yeah, the Christian one. Yeah, only forgiven, not perfect. So the Buddhist equivalent of that is only Buddhist, not Buddha.
Oh, now I get it.
Yeah. Yes. Still not Buddha. So I will give you the finger. Cut me off. And I'll regret later. Yeah, if you think about it, that original, and if we made one, it's kind of obnoxious. It's like a license to misbehave. Yeah, so this, this understanding of no. So let me talk about. Let me kind of propose this for you to think about. So when you have this understanding of kind of even not like a profound understanding, but intellectually kind of get, that the way we think of ourselves, of who we are, is too limiting and does not match the reality. But somehow there's this innate sense that I have always been me. The Buddha actually questions that, right? This innate sense that I've always been me. I've always remembered, me as me. Buddha actually questions that. So before you immediately answer, because I would say, if you immediately answer, say, yeah, of course, I've always been, precisely, Buddha said, that's the problem. You should really look into and see, like, is this just a stubborn belief that we want to hold on to? Until some really traumatic or tragic thing happens, and then we have to come face to face with the fact that that's not the case. That's when we go, I don't know what happened. That wasn't me. But it's never really been you, because it's constantly, right? So Buddha said, that the way we think of ourselves is very limiting and also does not coincide with how it actually is. And so there's a positive side, there's a negative side. The positive side is our view of who we are is too limiting. We always box ourselves in and say, here it is. This is how I take it or leave it.
In those moments of when we throw up our hands and go, that isn't me. What can we do in that moment to it's like that's an opportunity.
Yeah, sure.
To switch into what? It's like.
Oh, then you need to be Buddha.
You always.
You need to be with that, right? So wait, let me finish the thought before
Yeah,
I forget.
sure.
So this, right? So this, we need to investigate more the way Buddha described, like what is this thing that we call self? So that's one thing. Then within that context, we also accept karma. So one of the things that can happen, is that when something really unpleasant happens to us, I mean, there are many aspects to how that needs to be managed. But the part where our training in these teachings can help is to first of all say, this is the ripening of past karma. So I don't need to hate this. I don't need to deny this. I don't need to impatiently just want to run away from it. But that the karma that was, of experiencing this has been created. And as long as the causes and conditions are there, that reality manifests. But that reality that manifests is a temporary reality. That's what we tend to forget. That is a temporary reality. And in fact, we have lived through many of these realities, and we'll live through this reality too. And then remain present for it, but without judging yourself and being unkind to yourself. That I should be this, I should be that, I should be this, I should be that. I should have acted this, I should have acted that. And that's just ignoring the reality of what's going on. What's going on is that we are suffering. Yeah? But then the we that is suffering is, we should not also be so limited by it. And always remember, we can do something about this suffering without running away from it, without denying it, but accepting that this is. And then if we can take a step further to say, back to that point about the pain that I'm experiencing, may it relieve others of their pain. The Mahayana mind training, which is the next series that we're going to do, in February. The Tonglen meditation in Lojong. We're going to start that series. This Mahayana mind training, if we actively feel like, really, like this unskillful act that was created in the past has resulted in this karma, even though the person who created it is not the person who is experiencing it in that one-to-one scene, as in, I'm a continuity coming from there, so I'm inheriting that. But because I'm not really the person literally that created it, that is experiencing it now, I don't need to experience it exactly the way it was created. You see? And you don't need to beat yourself over it. You're a bad person, and therefore you deserve this. Nothing about karma, if you understand, is about deserving or not deserving. Unfortunately, the way we carelessly use the term karma, we instantly bring in, even if not with words, our minds, our hearts, instantly think about you deserved it, or you don't deserve it. But it's nothing to do with that. So when we look at it this way, an example I gave before, I have a friend who was having a bad cold, something very simple, and he lived with this old monk, and the monk said, and was asking him how is the cold, and he said, oh, really bad. And then he said something like, well, I guess I'm, purifying my negative karma. And the monk said to him, no, you're not. He says, right now it's just negative karma ripening. You don't purify it unless you actively think differently because he said, right now, as a negative karma is ripening, you are likely to create more negative karma. If you snap at people because you're not in a good mood, if you return kindness with nastiness. So, and he says, now, if you just simply said, if you don't do any of that, then the furthest you're doing is just letting this karma ripen, and then that's it. But you're only purifying it if you have the ability to recognize this is the result of a past cause that was unskillful, and that I should be more skillful with my actions. And then he says you really create a good out of this if you have the capacity to feel. May my suffering of this relieve others of their suffering. Now the monk also says, you can't literally do that. Take other people's karma. Because that's quite clear. You can't take other people's karma. But you train your heart with the willingness to do that. And that changes. That changes things.
Are there ways that taking actual actions to help other people struggling with things that you're struggling with?
Yeah, that's even better. Thing? Yeah, that's even better. Not just the willingness of the heart, but you actually engage in helping others.
Is that engagement actually a purification then of that existing?
If you kind of with intention do it that way. So intention is important.
Even if it's not accepted. Even if it's not accepted by that person.
Oh, well, we're going to be skillful about how we help other people. Yeah, otherwise.
Depends on what's there.
What?
It depends on the capacity of the
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's all I'm saying. I mean, there's 5 bazillion, mitigating circumstances, but underlying point is we need to be skillful. Just because we want to help.
No, okay.
I mean, so many people want to help to teach English in India or Tibetan monasteries, but not helpful. You come and go, 2 months, 3 months, disrupt people's lives. So skillfulness is important. Finally, this one. Why did he teach rebirth? I already mentioned this, so we'll just read this real quick. Now there is the case where a certain person is seen garlanded and adorned, freshly bathed and groomed, with hair and beard trimmed, enjoying the sensualities of women as if he were a king. They ask about him, my good man, what has this man done that he has been garlanded and adorned as if he were a king? They answer, my good man, this man attacked the king's enemy and took his life. The king, gratified with him, rewarded him. This is why he is garlanded and adorned as if he were a king. Then there is the case where a certain person is seen bound with a stout rope, with his arm pinned tightly against his back, his head shaved, bald, so on and so forth. They ask about him, my good man, what has this man done that he's bound with a stout rope and beheaded to the south of the city? They answer, my good man, this man, an enemy of the king, has taken the life of a man or a woman. This is why the rulers, having had him seized, inflicted such a punishment upon him. Then the Buddha cites similar cases where people are rewarded for stealing, engaging in illicit sex and lying, and so on and so forth. Now, what do you think, headman? Have you ever seen or heard of such a case? I have seen this, Lord, have heard of it, and will hear of it again in the future. So, headman, when these contemplatives and Brahmins who hold a doctrine or view like this say, all those who kill living beings experience pain and distress in the here and now, do they speak truthfully or falsely? Falsely, Lord, or mistakenly. So here he's addressing those who say, you only need to limit karma to just this life. And he says, well, here you run into this problem. Because clearly, if you look around, there's a lot of people that are being rewarded for very bad behavior. And a lot of people seemingly are being punished for good behavior. And so he says, you cannot limit it, have such a limited view. Not so much related to karma. My kind of something that sometimes I've emphasized, why it's also skillful to entertain, at least, if not literally believe, but to entertain or to contextualize your practice of meditation, your practice of, working with your inner life, to place that project within the context of many lifetimes is basically to give yourself more space. Because doing this inner work can get very tight and very claustrophobic very quickly. And if you limit it to only the here and now, it will make you crazy. It will become way, way more intense. That in all Buddhist traditions, generally all Buddhist cultures, accept or operate, from kid, they operate within this idea that there are multiple lifetimes. So all the Buddhist text that talks about how you have to do it now, you have to do it now, you have to do it now, that language is generated within a context and a culture where everybody understands that it's this wide. Now, those of us here that limit everything to here, and then we just indiscriminately take that language of urgency. Now, practice as if your hair is on fire, that you need to put it out, that urgency, plus the type A that most Americans are, it will just create a very tight, very quickly. Yeah.
On that topic, I have read a lot from a certain teacher or two about preparing for the bardo, and watching my father-in-law die. I did get this sudden urgent feeling like, oh my God, I got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Is there something to that though, that we realize? I guess that's more just right now in this lifetime. Anyway, I'm just curious about.
Yeah, of course, urgency is good, but certainly in Buddhist cultures they talk about the urgency. But all I'm saying is that the urgency is always within the background of multiple lifetimes. Likewise, if I was teaching in Asia, I'd be saying to them, don't keep thinking multiple lifetimes. How are you going to ensure that you have the conditions to practice Dharma in the next lifetime?
And that's what the preparing is.
A word about the bardo is don't learn too much about it. Yeah, I was teaching it too, and having some other thoughts now. And I'm appreciating why in a traditional context they say these teachings are not given willy-nilly. Because a lot of the teachings about all the precise details of what happens now has become public knowledge. At least it's publicly available. Whether buying the book or going to the right website, or for that matter, listening to me talk about it. I'm having some thoughts about, is that helpful or not? Might not be helpful.
Can it still be helpful to prepare, but not try to figure out what it is? In other words, to feel the urgency of doing.
Depending on what kind of preparation.
I mean the path.
Let's put it this way: the details that we're
skillfully navigating the virtues as quickly as possible.
Oh yeah, well, practicing mind training, practicing what we talk about. Yes.
Like if it puts a fire under your butt.
Yes, but the details about bardo, about dissolution, all of that.
Yeah, I don't think.
I don't think
Not like the whole, if I do this, will I get that? If I
No,
do
no,
this,
not
will
even
I
that,
get
not
that?
even that.
Just,
No, not even that. I'm not talking about, I'm talking about the details on dissolution.
You mean
Why
the
is it not
dissolution
helpful?
of the elements?
Yes. When this happens, this, then there's this sign, that sign.
Why could that be unhelpful?
Because our mind is not stable enough to recognize any of that. And then when it happens, we will panic even further. That's why those teachings were only given to people who have sufficiently prepared their minds. Now we are given the information and we have no capacity to handle that information. I think it creates even more anxiety.
like smartphones and children.
Actually, they do better than we do.
All the information they get.
You know, it's like, that's the mistake of thinking. The more information we have, the more knowledge we have, the better. But I'm seeing we don't have the capacity. So it's much better, I'm feeling now, for general people who are going through that transition. What you need to do is to remind them and assure them, things will be fine. Things will be fine. Even if this is someone who you feel has lived a very bad life, that is not the time to say, negative karma is going to come. Because you want to give them the best possible transition. So you don't give all those details about what's going to, you just keep reassuring, everything will be fine. Now it's different if they are a Dharma practitioner and they're very, their minds are clear. Then they should be given, then they should be read, actually, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And now you will see this, and now you'll see that. Imagine someone who has no control of their minds and also no exposure to this, and suddenly someone is reading to them. Now you'll see this, like, what? I think I'm really having more and more doubts about. This is not about whether the information is right or wrong. This is about skillful or not. So it's all about developing skill. And I think, better not, just general, And then, of course, here people with different faiths, different traditions, with faith, without faith. For those of us who are helping, we need to see how we can be most helpful. And then important too is, intention, motivation. But also good to pay attention to skills. Yes.
So it seems that as one traverses the path, that this recognition of what you were talking about, this sense of self, the sense of personal identity, there needs to be skillful activity around allowing that to softly dissolve, so that there's not this powerful sense of I needing to drive this process.
Yes. And particularly, in this culture. Sense of self is a little bit less unitary, rigid in many other cultures. I mean, as simple as, we talk about this, May and I, how in Chinese culture, our names aren't used that often. Our names, relative to here. And that makes a difference, how people refer to us. I think, in a very subtle but very, very kind of effective way, I think. Now, I'm not saying, at least me, she's selfless, but me, still very selfish, even though, but it's just configured differently. Like for us, within the family, different people get my attention by calling me with different things. There's an exact term. There's a YouTube of this two Chinese Americans. mapping out the whole family. It's unbelievable. Down to like, when someone calls me, say, with a certain term, they will know that in relation to that person, I am their father's brother's wife's younger brother.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, or I could be their mother's son's grandson's granddaughter's husband. There's a term for that. But all of that is disappearing as well now. Like my nephew's generation, everything is auntie and uncle. All older males and females are auntie and uncles. Then all younger is all just calling by name. So that's all gone. But otherwise, up until our generation, it's still there. Anyway, so karma, this is just an introduction to karma. There are other more kind of like 4 ways in which this, 3 ways in which that, and that kind of precision, is only useful if we first have this understanding of the dynamic nature of karma, and then the next step to be introduced to, if one wants to engage in specific practices to purify karma, what should we do? Then the more specific is given, so that that more specific information is embedded within a much more fluid and dynamic understanding of the subject, which is again not often there. We learn it like upside down, here, there, and everywhere. Then into like the 10 kind of virtuous actions, non-virtuous actions. Again, superficially, that list looks like the list that you find in other traditions. But what informs how you act with that, what you do with that list, can be very different. So hopefully, this introduction gives kind of a bigger picture of what karma is. Then later, we'll have opportunity to focus more on, more specific, what makes karma weighty, and how can we change the way karma manifests, how do we purify, all of that.
So when can we start?
Well, let's see what karma brings us. Not, you say, no, karma is about making. It's about action, right? So we have to create the action for.
Everybody work on that.
So yeah, well, I think, like I said, because we wanted to do the mind training Lojong and the Donglen first, so that will be the next series. Then after that, we could do the purification in terms of karma and all that as the next. So that's what we're trying to do here. Of course, you can just come randomly. Hopefully, that's even helpful. But if you have the inclination and the time and the ability, there is some method to the madness here, but it takes time. 30 years. 30 years.
We have lots of that if we have all these lifetimes.
Oh yeah, 30 years. No problem. So, thank you for coming. Now, normally and often, and even now, we should do dedication, but without necessarily always need to repeat or chant. To dedicate our merit is the idea that karma, we create karma. So we have created, mostly, I hope, virtuous karma by being here the last few hours. So then this karma, the effect of this karma, dedicate or not, it will always come back to us, as we know. But we could also safeguard this virtuous karma by putting it in a lockbox. No, that's an old joke. We can bank it in the Buddha bank. And the Buddha bank is the bank that is dedicated to the happiness of all. And so if we think, whatever good that comes from this, I bank it in the Buddha bank so that this is for the good of all. Then that's dedication. And tomorrow, for those of you who have the Vasudhara practice, we have